Romans 6, 1-14 commentary. Romans 6 marks a transition from Paul's explanation of God's abundant grace to the practical implications of what Christ accomplished. Having declared that where sin increased, grace increased even more, Romans 5, verse 20, Paul anticipates an objection. If grace is greater than sin, does that mean believers should continue in sin so grace can abound? Dead to sin, alive to God. Paul begins by asking, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? His answer is immediate and emphatic. God forbid. The reason is not that believers risk losing salvation, but that they have undergone a profound change in identity. Through union with Christ, believers have participated in his death and resurrection. Baptism is presented as a picture of this reality. Just as Christ died and was buried, believers have been identified with his death. Just as Christ was raised from the dead, believers now walk in newness of life. Paul is not describing a future possibility, but a present reality. The old person has been crucified with Christ. This means that sin no longer defines the believer's standing before God. The old covenant world, with its condemnation and bondage, has been replaced by the new covenant established through Christ's finished work. Believers are no longer viewed through the lens of Adam, but through the lens of Christ. The end of the old master. Paul explains that the old self was crucified with Christ so that the body of sin might be rendered powerless. Sin is pictured as a slave master. Humanity under Adam lived under its authority, unable to free itself from its dominion. Christ's death changed everything. Death settled the claim that sin had over those who belonged to him. Just as a deceased slave is no longer subject to an earthly master, those who died with Christ are no longer under sin's authority. Paul is not teaching sinless perfection. Rather, he is declaring a change of jurisdiction. The believer has been transferred from one realm to another. The reign of sin has been broken because Christ's reign has begun. Sharing in Christ's resurrection life, because Christ was raised from the dead, death no longer has dominion over him. His death was once for all, and his resurrection life is eternal. Believers share in that same resurrection life. Paul urges believers to reckon themselves dead indeed unto sin, but alive unto God through Jesus Christ. This is not a command to become dead to sin. It is a command to recognize what is already true. Faith agrees with God's declaration concerning our identity. The Christian life flows from understanding what Christ has accomplished. Victory is not achieved through self-effort, but through resting in the reality of union with him. Sin shall not have dominion. Paul instructs believers not to let sin reign in their mortal bodies. The command is grounded in the truth that sin's authority has already been broken. Believers are encouraged to present themselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life. The imagery reflects a transfer of allegiance. The members of the body are no longer instruments serving sin, but instruments serving righteousness. This righteousness is not self-generated morality, but the righteousness that comes through Christ. The climax of the passage appears in verse 14. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law, but under grace. Paul identifies the law as the realm in which sin exercises its power. Under the law, sin condemns and accuses. Under grace, believers stand fully accepted because of Christ's finished work. Grace is not permission to sin. Grace is the power of a new identity. The believer is free because Christ has fulfilled everything necessary for acceptance before God. Fulfillment in Christ's accomplished work. The realities Paul describes are rooted in the completed work of Jesus. Through his death, resurrection, ascension, and kingdom reign, the age of fulfillment arrived. The covenantal transition, anticipated by the prophets, reached its completion, and God's people entered the blessings secured by the Messiah. Romans 6 therefore calls believers to live from what is already true. They have died with Christ. They have been raised with Christ. They are no longer slaves of sin. They are no longer under law. They stand in grace, sharing in the life of the risen Lord. The chapter is ultimately a celebration of what God has accomplished through Jesus Christ, a finished redemption that transforms identity, establishes righteousness, and secures freedom from the dominion of sin.